Today's lesson is about capital planning. There's a need for capital planning for three basic reasons. One is that, unlike when we're just doing operating budgets, capital assets, large equipment, properties, things like that, have very long lives. And that raises the prospect that there's the potential for some pretty large long-term mistakes if we don't make good decisions. Another factor is that the cost of money in order to purchase those assets, because oftentimes we need to borrow in order to buy these large ticket items. Much like we talked about when we were talking about capital budgeting, the process we use for capital planning is related to the fact that these are one-time rare purchases for large ticket items that have long lives. The process we use is the Capital Improvement Program, the CIP, in which is most commonly a 5-year operating plan. Although the Park District that I chair now uses a 10-year plan because we have a lot of things in the pipeline and on the drawing board, so it seemed to make sense for us to do that over a longer period. We use that to set priorities and determine how we're going to make all the financing fit together for all of these projects, especially since we use a wide variety of both local and regional and state and sometimes federal money. And then, like we talked about before, the capital budget is just the first year that we adopt of that longer term plan. Here's an example of a CIP. If this looks familiar, it's the same one you saw when we talked about capital budgeting. It shows the various projects that we're going to do, both the costs that we're going to incur over those many years, and then also the funding sources. This is just a summary, which we usually do for that. At a real CIP, we usually have individual pages for each project. In this case, this shows you an example for the Martin Park that we're going to be building in 2 of the future years. We'll show the expenditures for that park, and we show that we're starting planning. We'll oftentimes break it down into the type of expenditure and then construct it over 2 years, with the bulk of that being done in the second year of the construction. Then also show the funding for just that project. Then of course those all roll up into the summary table. We'll also provide some background on that, sometimes some working drawings, cool pictures, things like that, just to describe what's going to happen. One thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that every time we do a capital project, it has the potential for impacting our ongoing costs, and a lot of folks don't account for this, which gets them into trouble. So you make one improvement, and it's not just that one-time improvement, but it has a long life. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Most often we're talking about having higher operating costs. Just a few examples are if we build a new park is probably the best example, like the example we were just using, where we previously took a undeveloped area where maybe it was just woodlands that we would let trees fall down when they did, and very, very little maintenance took place, maybe just for safety purposes. But once we develop that into a park, maybe we put in turf, maybe we put in ball fields, maybe we put in playgrounds. We have to mow that. There are a lot of ongoing expenses that we incur every year after the park is put in, and that needs to be factored in to the planning. Rather than just the one-time capital purchase. If you're not a government, then you also have to account for depreciation expenses. Even if you are a government, we allow for depreciation, even though that doesn't show up on our financial statements, and that's something we'll talk about in the second half of the semester. But it's something that we need to allow for funds to make those maintenance improvements as things wear out. We operated a marina in the city of Minnetonka, and we actually had a fund dedicated to accruing reserves each year, so that when we have to replace things as the docks wear out, that we will have the money to do that. It's not all on the negative side. Sometimes we make improvements to improve our operating costs, replacing pumps in our water stations, for example, or lighting that's far more energy efficient can save us money in the long term. We actually did this in Minnetonka. There were some federal funds that were being given away, as the federal government is wont to do, in which they would provide funding for these types of energy efficiency investments, and we applied for and got some of these grants. Although the fellow that did this swore he would never do it again, the red tape and bureaucracy going through the application, he did not think it was worth getting those getting those funds. We decided it was, because it was somebody else's money that we were going to be able to use to lower our operating costs. You often find yourself in that dilemma, though, when somebody is offering you what seems like free money. In fact, for many years, the federal government provided funding for police officers. They provided additional money that most cities went out and hired more cops, and then counted on that federal money being there every year to pay the salaries of those officers. That was not the case. At some point, the federal government decided they wanted to stop doing that, and so a lot of cities were left high and dry. They had to figure out different ways then to pick up those costs. We were fortunate in Minnetonka. We did not do that. We used it for one-time things, such as buying bulletproof vests, or buying new fingerprint equipment, things like that, so that we weren't stuck holding the bag when the feds decided to bail out, which they are wont to do. Lesson there is that there really is no such thing as a free lunch. So that's it for this lesson. Be sure to complete the questions. Thank you again for listening.